Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Modern Market. This is our daily show from Monday to Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, 12 p.m. GMT, where we discuss all things to do with the modern market. That is the crypto market, the NFT market, and how to make some, a lot, or no money on the internet. I'm your host, Bchek. I am joined by my legendary co-hosts, Legendary and Sammy. We're going to get into everything that's been going on in the past 24 hours, what's on our minds with the NFT and crypto market. But before we do that, just a reminder, friends, that nothing that we say here is financial advice. This market is exceptionally risky, so we don't know anything for sure. So please do proceed with caution and exercise some of your own judgment, or a lot of your own judgment. Welcome to the show. Legendary, it is Thursday. It is the 4th of April. How are you doing? How are you feeling?
GM. I think I'm doing well. I've been pretty busy for the last couple of days. Didn't really have time to think about that. But W airdrop felt very nice yesterday. That was a good win.
Yes.
The blast gold farming is going very well. Enjoying Cambria with Sammy more and more every day. Had my first little gold claim there as well today, which apparently now will be a daily gold claim. So that turns out to be a pretty smart thing to do. All credits to Sammy for onboarding me to that. That was not my own achievement. So yeah, I think I'm quite happy, quite busy, quite happy.
Very cool. Glad to hear it. As you said, nice win, nice W yesterday with the W airdrop. Good alpha on Blast. And we're going to actually do a bit of a segment on Blast today for the audience who are listening in. The structure of today's show, we'll obviously get to the headlines, which are in the snapshot. We're going to talk about NFTs versus coins, in particular in relation to XCOPY's release. We're also going to talk about the wormhole airdrop and some other future airdrops on the horizon. Then we're going to talk about Bitcoin ETFs. I heard on the podcast the other day, and it was reported by NFT Stats recently, is that 50% of the size of the gold ETF. Like, that's absolutely insane. Want to discuss that a little bit more, think that through. I don't know if that's people fully digested that or the significance of that. So want to reflect on that a little bit too. But we're definitely going to do a bit of an alpha section on Blast today because it's on our minds. All three of us, Legendary, Sammy, and I, have been definitely focusing on it for a little bit of time. So we definitely want to focus on that. So that's what we've got for you today. Before we get there, Sammy, how are you doing? What's your perspective been the last 24 hours?
Yeah, I mean, very much similar to you guys, trying different protocols, seeing what works, what doesn't, trying to monitor the amount of blast gold coming through to see if it's lucrative based on like capital deployed. So yeah, it's been an interesting, I mean, I've been doing it for about a week or 2 weeks now heavily. So I picked a few protocols that I think are doing well. And I've posted a lot of them on the timeline, a few that I haven't, but yeah, excited to get into it.
Yeah, look forward to that conversation, especially because it's interesting. We were speaking yesterday about how the timeline is getting more and more fragmented. Some people who are on Blast are not on Base, are not on Farcaster. Those people are not on Solana. Those people are not on Ordinals. And so clearly there's just a variety of ways to attack the space at the moment. Legendary, have you had any further reflections on like how to try to do those various things? Are you throwing some out the window, just being like, I'm not going to go there? How are you thinking about that at the moment?
Yeah, I think focus is important. I think that it is unwise to only focus on one thing. Quite bluntly, I think that is stupid, because if that is the only bet you have and that one fails, that is obviously a terrible situation. You can't do everything, but you certainly can do more than one thing. You can do 2 or 3 things. And with other topics, I think it's important that you find a way, if you want to participate, that doesn't take brain space and time. Like you said yesterday with dimension staking, whatever, if you have to track the daily to see if you received something, that's not as passive as you thought it was, and it's time critical. That's maybe not the best thing, but there might be other things to do. I've recently seen a post by Min, for example, who pointed out there's 2 other big groups who might have a token airdrop on Farcaster, and they have NFTs that are pretty cheap, that if you buy them, you might get an airdrop if there will ever be a token. So these are like bets that if you want to place them, they are not capital intense, at least from my perspective. They are like rather cheap bets. Take 2 seconds, I have some kind of exposure, don't really need to think about that anymore. Because if you have notifications on for the people who shield that, they will certainly share once that comes out and it's a win, if that is going to be the case. So I do think that like allocating resources goes further than just capital. It's also obviously brain power and time. And there's often ways to find solutions to get exposure to plays that require little time and little brain power. And then are also not your most capital intense bets, because realistically, you're not going to go all in on something you don't have any clue about. Or you will, but maybe you shouldn't.
Yeah, I like the perspective. I completely agree that you can't. What are you laughing at?
The comment that I just pinned by Smurfy.
Yeah, I know. I just said. I know we can't hear you now, Sammy. You got to keep the. Smurfy had a comment. I love Sammy's strategic placement of his microphone. Yeah, it's a funny placement. What was I going to say? I completely agree. One of the things that you have to accept in this particular market is that you can't optimize for all things. And so Sammy was sharing with us yesterday how he's kind of done various things on Parcel, for example, kind of really specialized in it. But that was one of the ones, for example, for me, where it's like, look, I'm going to deposit, I want to participate, but that's one of the things where I need to park the capital and I need to not think about it anymore because I'm doing some other things. So that's just a strategic decision you have to take at some point in time. Sammy, did you have any reflections there? Is there anything at the moment out of those 4 things we kind of identified yesterday, like ordinals, Solana, Blast, and restaking maybe? Like, which one are you throwing in the bin at the moment?
So for me, I think the ordinal stuff, it's just too much friction for me to get my head around. And I think even if I did, I'd be low down the ranks in terms of knowledge. So I just don't think I'd make any capital there or make any money. I think I'd be the X liquidity. So for me, it's like, I really find the Parcel stuff on Solana interesting because it's real estate. It's RWAs, it's kind of indices that you've got data behind. So I find that interesting. I find Blast interesting, the applications that are being built.
Yeah.
And I think after the EtherFi stuff, we just know that Eigenlayer and restaking is going to be pretty impressive. So that's kind of where my attention's at.
Makes sense. Legendary, before we hit the headlines and get into the other bigger discussions, any that you're throwing in the bin at the moment?
Probably ordinals is the one where I'm like least active. Try to get exposure via doing lending on ordinals using a couple protocols, but not trying to trade collections, get whitelists. That's probably the one that I have to dedicate the least attention to.
Yeah, I think it's completely fair enough. Will not make some of the maybe Bitcoin enthusiasts happy. See Funky on stage. I see English in the audience too. But there's the reality of the market at the moment. You can't hit everywhere. So let's get into the headlines. As always, it's in the snapshot, which is pinned up top. If you do find it brings you some value today, please do give it a like. So we're going to start with some price action. We've got crypto all completely flat, pretty calm day in the market today. Crypto, Bitcoin is at 66.1K, ETH is at 3.3, Solana is at 185. In terms of the headlines, W launched, this is Wormhole launches at a $15 billion valuation yesterday, but falls to a $12 billion valuation by the end of the day. Often these airdrops come out cool when everyone's kind of selling into them, and then there's a rise after. I want to talk about whether we still think that's the case for this one and how that might play out for other protocols coming to market pretty soon. Number 2, Bitcoin ETFs reach half the size of gold ETFs. Definitely want to reflect on that a little bit. Got an article to go through. And finally, XCOPY flies up 4x on an NFT mint price. NFT stats provided some context here. They said 2 weeks ago, XCOPY minted an open edition of a fly image for $2.30 each. People bought over 1 million of them. A week ago, a token flies was created. You could wrap your open edition NFT for a token. XCOPY endorsed the token today by retweeting it, and the price jumped from $4 to $20 and now down to $10. In just a couple of weeks, open edition minters are up 2 to 3x when you include fees. Definitely want to get into a conversation on the relationship between these more meme-like coins versus NFTs themselves. Like, is there even any demand for NFTs anymore? Is the ultimate end goal for all NFTs some kind of more liquid ERC20? Want to talk about all of that in a little bit too, and potentially touch on these 404, the 404 technology, which is kind of in that realm too. So we're going to touch on all of that in a bit. Some notable sales: we had Nazuki Fire at 30 ETH, Memeland Captain's Alien selling for 29 ETH, CryptoPunk Crazy Hair selling for 50 ETH. And the other floor prices, CryptoPunks are still holding at 42 ETH, Bored Apes up a few percent, bouncing to 12.4, Mutants at 1.9, DGods at 1.4, down 11%. Captains up a few percent at 3.5 ETH. Azuki's at 4.2, Penguins up a few percent at 12.2, Mad Lads steady at 130, and the Nouns winning bid was at 8.5 ETH. Legendary, those are the headlines. That is the price action. Anything catching your attention before we get into the main headlines?
Yeah, definitely. Today, that would be the Moonbirds for me, being down 25% over the last 24 hours, being down 35% over the last 7 days, and now sitting at a 0.53 ETH floor price.
God, yeah, I saw that earlier as well. And I was like, is that I actually had this conversation with myself, like, is that a headline? I mean, I feel like on some level it is a headline, but at the same time, I just don't know enough people who care about this collection, like currently, to warrant it being a headline. But it's kind of a headline mainly from because of where it was before, if you see what I mean. Like, is there a bottom on this, Legendary?
If you look at the official X account and look how low their engagement currently is, they do posts that get 5K views, 6K views, 13K views, and 200K followers. That's basically shows you how much attention went away and how little people care to even follow the announcements or view the announcements. It seems like even if they have something to say or to announce, it doesn't really reach the timeline anymore. So I think there is still more pain to be experienced.
I mean, I completely agree with you. The engagement point is a really good point. Interestingly, before I go to Sammy for his thoughts on this as well, you know, the show that I do with Thread Guy is sponsored by Wasabi in part, and we have to do this trading challenge. And I've been getting wrecked. Like I like been going long things, and then the price goes down, and I've been getting wrecked in general. But one of the things I did do recently was I put a short on Moonbirds at about 0.85 after it had gone up in price for whatever.
And now you're leading in the competition.
Probably not, because I think I got entirely wrecked on some of the other ones. But we'll see. I will report on it, how I'm doing after. Sammy, what do you think here? Like, you know how when people joke that certain NFTs are going to go to zero, like, is it going to go to zero? Like, what's the reason to buy a Moonbird in particular right now?
Yeah, it's tough. I think you would have hoped that the Yuga acquisition would have done something, but it seems to have done the opposite. I don't know if just a complete capitulation, so like bottoming out before they kind of revamp it. But yeah, it surprised me. I honestly thought that maybe it would settle around that, might bounce back above 1 ETH and just hover around there, but it's properly gone down. Yeah, I think it's just like Legendary said, full on capitulation. You don't have many people interested in what's going on. I don't see many Moonbirds on the timeline as well. Be interesting to see on Inspect the number of holders compared to other collections, but I suspect it's pretty low.
Yeah, that would be interesting. The one thing I would say about the whole, whether it counts as being the Moonbirds ecosystem or whether it's the Proof ecosystem, like to what extent they're interchangeable, is that the art stuff is really, really good from what I can tell. Like, I know things hasn't worked out perfectly, maybe even with that, but I think that there's some, like, the Grails, the way they roll out the Grails stuff, the way they work with a lot of the top artists, both in the space and outside the space, because they've onboarded people from outside too. I thought that was always really, really cool. So, Legendary, is that like a saving grace? Do you think that's why Yuga bought them?
I don't know. I don't know if that's a saving grace. When I had a post about that ETH NFTs aren't dead, and that people should stop referencing Mutants, Moonbirds as an example of why ETH NFTs are dead. Someone said it's pretty harsh to compare Mutants and Moonbirds, and someone else pointed out, no, it's not pretty harsh because it's the same company. And if you see the downwards momentum that Yuga is currently experiencing, I don't think that this is a saving grace. And even if there's a turnaround for Yuga, because they do something that gets the community behind them, that will directly flow into apes, into Mutants, into the core NFTs, and not into the like most recently acquired franchise, which certainly isn't the highest priority right now. If anything, it's just an additional thing that they added to the portfolio, but not the highest priority that they're working on right now. In terms of inspect, that's actually a very interesting point. I did have a look at the collection. The total collection reach is down to 8%, which means estimated percentage of NFTX exposed to this collection in the preceding 24 hours. That's down quite a fair bit, and that's basically from all holders together. But what I found more interesting is to look at the PFP flows. So basically, people who had a Moonbird before,
Okay, interesting.
what PFP do they have now?
And such an interesting metric, PFP flows.
So we see Azuki, Apes, Mutants, MFers, Pudgy Penguins, CloneX, ETH, Scriptions, and Isekai Meta as like the recent changes away from Moonbirds to new PFP.
Interesting. Okay, really interesting. I've never heard that as a metric before. I like it. Sammy, did you want to speak to that as well? I know you've just shared the link. I'll try and share it at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I was just looking through it. But yeah, Azuki seems to be pretty big. It's just interesting the actual assets going into Moonbirds as well. So you've got some Bored Apes, obviously from the Yuga collection, but it is a lot less. You can look at the sizes as well in terms of the actual the volume, but most people seem to be going from Moonbirds into Azuki and back into Bored Apes, so and Mutants as well. I don't really know what this MOAR is by Joan Cornelia.
Yeah, me neither. I do not know. That is a really interesting diagram. For the people who are watching in, they can see that. For the people who are listening in, if you go to NFT Inspect, you can see like from which collections the Moonbirds community like were converted. So it will have like Bored Ape, and then it will go into Moonbirds, and then it's got another set of lines going to the collections, which I guess the Moonbirds have changed their profile pictures in order to become these new things. So as you say, Azuki, Bored Apes, more by Joan, Cornella, Mutant Apes, MFers, Pudgy Penguins, CloneX. Really interesting flow diagram there to see. Very, very interesting stuff. Okay, good to touch on that. I thought that was an interesting thing to bring up. Huge price action, as you said, down 30%. So right to bring that up. But we want to get into, as always, we're going to do like a little bit of a deep dive before we get into the headlines today. And today we thought it would be really helpful, given how much time we're spending on thinking about Blast Gold. Sammy did this awesome thread. I believe he just published it this morning on Blast Gold and a few protocols that he is looking at there. Sammy, why don't you just set this up for us again? Why do you think Blast Gold in particular, like what is Blast Gold versus the other points? Why do you think it's so important? And then we'll walk through some of these protocols.
Yeah, so Blast Gold is effectively, I think there's a conversion of about 35,000 Blast points per Blast Gold. So if you interact with the applications, so the dApps on Blast, they have an allocation of Blast Gold, and then they distribute that back to the users of that app. So then that then shows up in their dashboard. I don't know what will happen in terms of how whether that gold will then be converted into Blast points to then work out the overall Blast token at the end of May, whenever that is. But there's each of these applications. If you have low liquidity, sometimes it's better to go for other apps that have a decent amount of Blast Gold, but don't have much TVL or open interest or traded volume, depending on what type of application it is. So I've just been digging around to try and find out which applications potentially have those low metrics but high stashes of Blast Gold. These are some of the ones I picked out. Obviously, this is changing all the time, so it completely depends that if I post this thread and then people switch out, go into this, then it's obviously not going to be as lucrative. But you just got to stay curious and just find out which protocols are underfarmed, and then just kind of be pretty active with it. But ultimately, I think each epoch you get the applications will then distribute that blast gold back to the users, so it will eventually show up in your dashboard. I don't know when that transition is done. I think Cambria have just done theirs, which is Degen Arena, so that's like a RuneScape inspired game. They just distributed about 224k. That was predominantly for those that were early adopters. They've got a second distribution coming through soon. Spacebar is pretty continuous. I see that coming through relatively regularly, particularly for the blast points. And then yes, some other ones, I think DTX, which is the top one, that's like a perp dex. I've just noticed that they're pretty quick to list these new tokens, and I think if people are interested in using those derivatives products on new tokens that have just launched to try and make a bit of money, the speed to market is pretty useful. Even though the wormhole token, I don't think it's on Blast, but it basically the derivatives product allows you to take a directional bet on the price. I think they listed the wormhole token within about an hour, which is pretty rapid. And I've noticed a number of other tokens that they've kind of launched as well relatively quickly. Blade Swap, that's just a spot dex. You can provide liquidity in there as well. But that you just literally just log in daily, open loot boxes, claim NFTs, which then convert to Blast Gold distribution based on the rarity of those NFTs. YOLO Games, which Legendary can definitely speak to because he loves this. But I think with this particular one and a few others like Decentral Games, there's a few poker players that I've noticed that are playing, and they're playing it like pretty religiously, and in a very systematic way that you kind of net, as long as you statistically play it okay, then you should be out on top, especially with the airdrop. So that's just quite an interesting observation to see. District 1, this kind of took off about a week ago when Pac Moon kind of integrated that, sent that parabolic. I think people who are using this app early on and staked their OLE token to get S OLE.
So this one is like Friendtech on Blast, but better in your opinion?
It's better, yeah. It's more interactive. Like you drop gems in there, people can randomly like click them if they own a share, or even if they don't own a share. Some channels.
I felt like I was in a nightclub when I signed up to this. It's like there's things flashing everywhere. Then you've got to like do this rally thing where you're like participating, and they're like, oh, now we're going to rally. Then the screen starts like pulsing with like luminous colors. It's actually a bit like, it's like, whoa, what's going on here?
Yeah, it's a bit overwhelming when you first get into it, but you eventually kind of work out where everything is, and ultimately you want to be in the rooms that are at the top of the leaderboard because they have the most gems to distribute. And if you own one of those shares, then you get like a share of the OLE when those shares are bought and sold, but you also get more gems. So you get boosts. If you stake the OLE token, you can then get 2 to 3x boosts in gems. And the more gems you accumulate, it basically means that those Blast Gold, their Blast Gold distribution can then get shared amongst those who have earned the gems. So you'll see, I think Pranksy's top. He's got like 1 point or maybe even 2 million gems now, versus my humble 137k. So yeah, you get distribution based on that. I think they've done one Blast Gold distribution. The second one should be coming up pretty soon. But it's very interactive.
The more gems you have, the more gold you get, and you get gems by just participating in the chats and being around.
Yeah, so you can get the owners of the chats. So say for instance, Pac Moon, they could effectively distribute gems to community members that are adding a lot of value. You can do it through rallies, which is like a button that you click at the top. You stake 200 gems, and then it's like a race to try and get as many gems when that comes through. And that happens, I think, every 2 hours. So there's like a gamified approach to it. And there's also, if you provide value, then you can be rewarded by the owners of the channel. And the more engagement and participation in the channel, the more gems to get allocated to that particular channel. So it's like a self-perpetuating cycle of just getting gems, really.
Okay. That's really, really interesting. In my opinion, after using it for no longer than 25 minutes, it does feel it's way better than Friendtech. Does it not that it's going to survive when all of the incentives fall away, but I thought it was like this is something like this is really like built up in a kind of unique and interesting way, which is far more intense. It felt quite intense being in these rooms because they would kept. So I'm in the Juice room because I mean we invested in Juice. We have some tokens, so I think you need 500 Juice to get in there. So I already had the tokens, and there's just like constant things coming up on the screen where like claim some the hosts of the room are just saying like, right, we're doing a little airdrop of gems now, just press the button, and the things just keep exploding in your face. So definitely pretty intense. Final point on Moon, Sammy, and then maybe Legendary can speak to YOLO Games as well, because I know he's been enjoying that.
Yeah, so Moon, they just distributed about $1 million. I think it's $1 million worth of pack, whether it's a million pack, but the price is currently at like 0.04, 0.03. So I think some of the biggest participants, so based on your impressions on Twitter about posting about Moon, so being a community member that's trying to spread the good word of Pack, you received an airdrop. And some of those, I mean, I think I got about $2,500 worth, but some of the top creators that were at the top of the leaderboard got about 10 times that, so $25,000, $30,000 just as an airdrop. So, and the fact that they're integrating it into different platforms, you touched on Juice being in District 1.
Yep.
But they've also got Moon. They've got a number of other tokens and collaborations that you need to hold those native tokens to get into those rooms. Also Wasabi, you can stake Pack. YOLO Games, I think they've just integrated that, so you can wager with Pack token. Cambria's been in the pipeline for a little bit of time now, so you'll be able to duel and wager that. So I think that's another point. I think just cross collaboration between different protocols is pretty interesting, because ultimately a rising tide lifts all boats. So I think that's a net positive for the space, and I think the more that gets integrated, I think that Moon could become the number one meme token on Blast, and there's probably a lot more utility to a lot of these meme tokens. So
really awesome summary, really helpful. Like, I encourage all of you to, if you are interested more in Blast, check out Sammy's thread. Maybe we can get it posted in the comments at least, or it's just one of the first tweets when you go into his profile. So you can click through right there on X. A couple of questions in the Twitter comments, and then definitely want to hear from Legendary on YOLO Games before we hit the headlines today. What would you, this is from Mootcat, what would you suggest? Buy the gaming token or buy, oh, this is a different tweet. I don't know why that's up on my, why I've been tagged for that. That's got nothing to do with this. So we'll go to a different question. Muse provided some context. Blast Swap NFTs from loot boxes will not contribute towards Blast Gold starting season 3 went live today. Sammy, is that correct or not correct?
Sorry, say that again.
Blast Swap NFTs from loot boxes will not contribute towards Blast Gold starting season 3.
Okay. Is that just going forward? I think if you look at so scroll up to the Blade Swap tab, I did a screenshot of what each thing does, so whether you provide liquidity or swap volume, and I think there's also what the boxes do.
Interesting. Okay, well, that's definitely something to monitor. And as Sammy said, really important thing to note. It's like, yes, we put information out on whatever day we do. Tomorrow it could change. Could literally change tomorrow. The R&R could change tomorrow. The underlying fundamental details could change tomorrow. Legendary, would love to hear your thoughts, maybe on all of the opportunities on Blast, but also maybe specifically, I know you've been enjoying YOLO Games, so you can speak to some strategy there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the interesting thing with Blast is that there is a series of strategies that are good to very good that are being shared on the timeline publicly. And then there's like a series of insanely good strategies that just a few people are using across various protocols and nobody really shares them. It's a lot of PvP going on there. Like, if it's a completely different sentiment as with airdrops. Like, when Parcel was early, people love to talk about Parcel. People love to talk about Parcel even more. Once it blew up and the TVL started to grow more and more, because the general consensus was the bigger a project, the bigger the TVL, the bigger everyone's airdrop and everyone's cake, a piece of the cake or slice of the cake is gonna be. Whereas with gold, I feel like people view it as a finite resource, which is pegged to be 50% of the blast airdrop. Hence everyone's like a bit more restrictive with sharing and trying to keep the best of alpha to themselves. And I do think that you have to basically divide strategies in two kind of strategies. There are strategies like using juice finance or providing a liquidity pool on Thruster, staking that on Hyperlock, and maybe it's liquidity pool for Renzo so that you farm like 3-4 things at once, which is a smart thing. And it's a thing that you can do with capital that you're willing to lock up. And then there's like the strategies that don't require you to lock up capital, but to like create volume, whether it's YOLO games, whether it's Cambria, where you basically have to understand the incentive system that, for example, YOLO has created as a game that allows you to play coin flip games with Poke the Bear, or as a game where if like Chris Hanichin, the poker player that you pointed out in your thread, Sammy, who simply has enough cash to play the wheel, to play YOLO, because YOLO has more than just the wheel, right? And basically know that he's gonna have that return to the mean if he plays enough rounds with enough ETH, and he isn't scared to throw in 50 ETH if there's a 100 ETH plot to just go for the 50 ETH coin flip. So, but there's also other things to do on YOLO, right? You can do Poke the Bear, for example. There's also Moon or Doom. And now if you look at the incentive system with the rake back, where like if the house takes 1% in fees, you get 30% back in rake back. You have lottery tickets that you collect, and you have Gold Rush, where also they have like this guaranteed 0.5 gold every time you spin on Gold Rush, which you achieve by doing volume on the platform. Then you will come to quickly see that basically you get the entire house fee back with those incentives if you create enough volume. Because if you create enough volume, you get a significant number of lottery tickets, and you're going to win the lottery every day, every second day, whatever. And then all the gold and all the other incentives that you get are on top. And that doesn't include the token that is to come. So, but it's also one of the more intense protocols because you have to play, you have to monitor it, right? But I do think that there are also strategies that you can play with a lesser amount of capital. I feel like that is a very similar thing with Cambria, where there's also like incentives for the top of the leaderboard to get like more rake back, essentially from the fees that they're paying. This on the Gamblefy and on the gaming side of things. And for the other strategies, I would probably still look at the thing that I mentioned before, where you just combine stuff and get exposure to multiple topics, because we talked about like attention that you have to distribute. For example, I don't have the time right now to do as much as I would love to do with restaking. Especially when it comes to the more complex things with Pendle, where you have a 40x leveraged play and you have to monitor that. But at least I know that if I do purchase Renzo ETH, set up a liquidity pool on Thruster, stake that on Hyperlock, I farm 3 tokens, I farm gold, and I also have that exposure to Renzo and to their token potentially. So I feel less bad for like not optimizing that play, because I know that I farm 3 things at once, which is certainly more EV positive than just throwing it into one single thing and waiting there. And then the other and final strategy for me would be, and that's exactly also the point that what Sammy was making in the thread, that those ratios and gold distributions change and new protocols come up. And also the most time intense one, go around, find new protocols, enter them, go for the smaller ones, and try to be a bigger player in something that nobody has discovered yet. That's also the part that obviously has the biggest risk. If there's a new rug coming up, there's something you don't really know. One final point that I wanted to make on that, I've seen that Kettle Finance, for example, had launched Kettle Finance RWA tokenization. They have watches. I love watches. I've seen an interesting loan for a Rolex Datejust. Where I'm like, fuck, I'm gonna provide the loan and collect points. But then I also realized I've been DMing with the team. I never had a call with them. I never have like checked how legit they are or not, and like maybe I should do that before I give a loan for like a more expensive watch on there. but it's a protocol that has like what, 1 million TVL or loan volume. Is like super small. So if they are legit, which again I'm not doubting, I simply haven't had a chance to do due diligence yet on them, that might be an interesting play to participate in. And it also has a bit of a higher entry cost because it's not as cheap and not as like gradual, because you have to have a minimum amount of capital to be able to either buy a luxury watch or provide a loan against it.
I think that's a really, really good point. In fact, that was the one thing I was going to ask both of you to bring out, because yes, you can go further down the risk curve to the smaller protocols, lower TVL, maybe higher value of gold to dollars that you insert, but you are taking a greater risk because you may not know the teams as much. So definitely just wanted to make that clear for people. And the final thing that I wanted to say on top is, yeah, that's the key distinction. When you start talking about rakebacks, for example, people are definitely doing the maths and starting to conclude for certain protocols in certain instances that, you know what, even if I burn some ether, even if I burn some capital, I'm going to get it back. I'm going to get it back via different random incentive schemes, whether it's via a token, whether it's via gold, whether it's via ETH. So definitely worth checking those out and kind of factoring that in. The other thing to factor in finally is, different capital, as Legendary said, to bring that point to the forefront again. It only works if you're able to generate a reasonable volume sometimes. So, well, for the particular strategy he was talking about. So definitely worth bearing in mind. Interesting conversation there. I hope that was helpful in terms of how we're thinking about Blast from different perspectives. And then we want to get into the headlines now. The first headline is to do with XCOPY's NFT collection, which became a token. And I think this is a really, really important discussion to have at the moment, because every NFT, like, it feels like interest in NFTs has gone down significantly. Lots of older collections are bleeding. Current collections are only, well, I guess they're selling out on ordinals, for example, but I'm not convinced that the ETH market is particularly healthy. And everyone's obsessed with ERC20s, so coins. But this was an example where XCOPY minted an open edition of a fly image for $2.30. People bought 1 million of them, and then it was wrapped. And this is not like an official wrapper by XCOPY themselves. This was someone who did this, and created the flies token. XCOPY then retweeted it in the last 24 hours, and then the price went crazy. Just for the people watching in, I've got the chart here, which looks absolutely insane. It was like down at maybe 3 cents, 4 cents at one point, and then just like ripped to 20, and now has since come back. I think it's at about $8 now. So an interesting thing where an NFT is created, people then wrap it, create a liquid token to represent that NFT. I believe you can actually go back, like once you have X amount of the coins, you can go back to the NFT too. Legendary, what's your headline thought about this? Then want to hear from you, Sammy, on like how this relates to 404s. What's the connection between NFTs and coins here? Legendary first.
Yeah, when I saw the XCOPY mint, I did purchase a couple hundred, and I posted it publicly that I'd be surprised if this isn't turned into a token. Obviously, two approaches to that: either XCOPY doing it himself or someone doing it on their behalf, which is exactly what happened. So I am not at all surprised to see that. You are absolutely correct. You can kind of unwrap the token, the ERC20 back into the NFT, and it makes sense, right? If you see the meme coin season, you see the hype on base, and someone is savvy enough to come up with a smart contract for that, and seeing that maybe XCOPY planned to do that at some point, and someone was fastened and whatever, we'll probably never know. But if someone just saw that opportunity and sees that, I wasn't certainly the only person who felt like buying hundreds of those flies feels like a meme coin pre-sale.
I definitely agree with you there. I wasn't thinking that direction. Sammy, you obviously were. I know you bought a few hundred more. Why did you buy a few hundred more? And what do you think about this NFT turning into tokens? How does it relate to the 404's technology?
Yeah, to be honest, I just minted 420 for the culture. But yeah, I mean, for $2.30, I thought it was pretty much an asymmetric risk. If it goes down to $1, it's not the end of the world. I just think it had so much upside.
Yeah.
I think when I minted, there was a couple of 100,000, not a million. Yeah, so it got saturated a little bit, diluted. The whole 404 meta, I think you've got Pandora, who were one of the first to do it. Then you had Saigar and I think OXQuit and a few others that built that DN 404, which is a slightly different way of looking at it.
Just explain what 404s are for people if they're not, if they haven't like properly crystallized it yet.
So effectively look at like an NFT collection being minted. So say you have a 10,000 PFP NFT collection, you can convert that into, so it's native in the contract that you can literally convert it into a fungible equivalent. So
and it doesn't have to be 10,000. I know people keep using the PFP example, but it could be 1,000 fidenzas, right?
Yeah, it can be any number. But I think the reason why it's such a big thing is liquidity is such an issue in the NFT market. You've got Flooring Protocol tried to solve that problem with the locking the NFT up and then turning it into mu tokens for that particular collection. So it's kind of like they've taken it one step further by making it native within the contract, so within that contract standard. But yeah, this is a similar thing where all of a sudden, I mean, I use the example of the Tesla stock. So they did a 5-for-1 stock split back in 2020. And if you look at the price action, it absolutely mooned just before, I think, or just after, just because it enables people who don't have that liquidity to get exposure. So price exposure. So say, for instance, you can't afford the whole NFT,
sure,
but a lot more people will then be able to afford a portion of that. So ultimately you have a lot more interest. It pumps the price up, and just naturally, that's just how it happens. And you can buy and sell. People are willing to hold because they know they can sell it or a portion of it and get some of that liquidity back. So I think it's revolutionary. I think it will be the future of where NFTs trend. I've written a thread on that as well. And I think ultimately that's probably the direction they will go. I think, yeah, it's hard to see how the traditional ERC 721 is going to be the future of NFTs unless they're single high value assets that you bring on chain that you have to sell as an entire single asset, whether that's like a property or a car or those kind of assets. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see which way it goes. But I think it's certainly an interesting play, and I'm still holding all 420 of my copies at the moment. So
interesting. Legendary, do you think that this is the ultimate way for NFTs to go? Like, is there any other end game for an NFT collection other than an ERC20? And does it do they need to have this flexibility of flipping between the two?
I think it's super helpful. Yeah. If you might think whatever you want about Blur, but it was a nice liquidity provision that happened on Blur. If it was farmers or organic activity, that doesn't really matter. And having that inbuilt in a collection that just allows you to natively trade it in a more frictional way than just having to buy or sell at minimum of one NFTs is super helpful. Obviously, that's also very helpful that we have a base season now, that we have L2s who are getting more popular places to be, because it is a more complex smart contract, which means that the gas fees would be higher. And there is no point in doing that if you want to enter an NFT collection with a small budget of 0.01 ETH, and then you pay double or 4 times the amount of that to convert, and then another 0.05 ETH to swap. So it's good that the layer 2s are so active and have their own NFT or trading communities as well. And having this inbuilt liquidity feature makes a lot of sense for collections to have, in my opinion. Yeah.
Interesting. It's really, really interesting, because I'm coming to the greater conclusion that it doesn't feel like there is able to be an end state for collections that isn't this in some form. Like, I don't know if we've hit the perfect form yet. Maybe 404s will make it more interesting, but it just feels like that's what people are waiting for when they're holding NFTs. It's like, well, and if you're not going to provide something like that at some point, things just trend lower. So I'm not saying that's definitively the case. It's just an interesting thing to observe how the market is treating some of these things. So we'll keep monitoring that. We'll keep thinking about that and bringing those conversations to you. We've got a couple more headlines to discuss. We'll just touch on both of them. But before we get there, we'll do the Web3 roundup to get you up to speed with everything else that's been happening in the space in the last 24 hours. As always, for the people watching in, I will share it on screen. For the people who are listening in, I will read it out. So we have first, Zeus Network raises $8 million to bring BTC to Solana. Believe their token is going live today on Jupiter. I think so. That's like the first official launch on the Solana Jupiter coin launchpad. Exciting to see like how that plays out, because they've got a long list of people who will want to launch with them. Number two, Mando and Keyboard Monkey launched Epic Duck meme coin yesterday. Mando explained, we literally made this coin chatting shit on Rect Radio live stream about how all meme coins were cats and dogs. It's an OG meme I remember from growing up. Anyone watching the show could have bought it. It was done on pump.fun. It blew up in about 10 minutes of launch, and I've burnt the dev supply now. Interesting stuff. It seems to be, I'm not exactly sure what the price is at the moment. Maybe we'll give it a check in a bit. Interesting to see meme coin mania continue. Next, Sharkify announces airdrop checker for users to see their standing so far. NFT lending protocol on Solana, one of the main ones. I'm an investor there, but I think it's a very good protocol worth checking if you have been a user. Huge statistic coming out of Eigenlayer, surpasses 4 million ETH in TVL yesterday. Absolutely outrageous. Someone commented to me in the snapshot, and I said, hopefully too big to fail. Because you don't want that to go down in any way. Next, Franklin Templeton published a paper on the rise of Bitcoin ordinals. Pretty insane to see some of these traditional institutions producing that type of literature. Next, Pacmoon drops $1 million worth of PAC tokens to creators. Sam, you mentioned that earlier. And finally, Friendtech points are selling for $4 to $5 per point. Friendtech users will be rejoicing. Legendary, that is the rest of the Web3 roundup from the rest of the space from the past 24 hours. We've got two more headlines to touch on. Which one do you want to discuss? Do you want to touch on Bitcoin ETFs reaching half the side of gold ETFs? Maybe riff on the significance of that. Would you want to talk about the wormhole launch at $15 billion, but its fall to $12 billion? Where do you want to
go? Easy pick. Bitcoin ETFs. Let's touch on that, because okay. I do think that this is a pretty significant number that not everyone has like fully seen the significance of.
Sure. Okay. Just for a little bit of context, and I'll come to you for your commentary. Want to hear from Sammy too. Maybe Funky will have some thoughts as our resident Bitcoin expert. He's up on stage with us too. This was reported actually some time ago. It was about a week ago, but it's kind of hit the timeline in the last few days or come across my attention. It said, since January the 10th, following the approval of 11 Bitcoin spot ETFs, their combined assets have surged to over $50 billion, nearly half the assets held by gold ETFs. There are 1.35 million Bitcoins to be mined in the next 116 years. This is some nice data I wasn't aware of. And the new exchange-traded funds have accumulated 340,000 in 10 weeks. In April, the Bitcoin halving is expected to reduce the fresh supply paid to Bitcoin miners to 450 Bitcoins per day. The new ETFs are buying nearly 6,500 Bitcoins per day. Where will the rest come from? What are we seeing? What we are seeing is the typical run-up of Bitcoin prices into the halving event to encourage longer-term holders to take profits. This is an article on Barron's, which I believe is related to the Wall Street Journal. Interesting to see them reporting in this way, clearly like trying to lead people into thinking that there is too much demand, supply is going down, therefore price goes up. Legendary, what do you think about the fact that it's happening, that the Bitcoin ETFs are hoovering up so much of the supply, and the fact that it's even being reported in this way in mainstream media now?
I think all of that is pretty significant. We also had that benchmark a month ago or 3 weeks ago, I don't recall, when the ETFs flipped silver as an asset class for the first time, and everyone was like, yeah, okay, that's pretty cool news, but that's not significant because the real champion is gold, and that's the one to look at. And it kind of seemed like it is so far away, and it seemed like a far-fetched dream to talk about the BTC ETF flipping gold and being 50% on that way in what has been 3 months, 3.5 months maybe, is an insane achievement. Because I remember us speaking about BTC ETF, obviously amazing news, sustained buying pressure, changing of investment behavior in the States, that it becomes just good practice to maybe have 1 to 2% of your portfolio's crypto exposure, is something that takes years, something that might take a decade to have this kind of change. It took ETFs quite a while to be accepted and to be as widely used as they are today. But seeing how fast things are moving with Bitcoin, and obviously there's a lot of institutional money and pressure flowing into that, is something that I find completely surprising,
Crazy,
and
right?
obviously in a very positive way.
Yeah. Two really interesting points on the back of what you just said. It reminded me, I watched this Bankless podcast because good friend of the show and personal friend, Daniel, who's in the audience with us today, shared it with me and was just like, this makes me even more insanely bullish, because every time we meet, we're always just talking about how insanely unhealthily bullish we are about different things. But it was a podcast with what I think the CEO or someone in Bitwise, which is one of the providers of these ETFs. And they make the point. It didn't seem like the Bankless people were aware that we were 50% away already. And they were like, wait, what? 50%? We're going to do that in we'll flip that in 2 months or something like that. That was the genuine feeling, I think, was like, we're only a 2x away. Like, what is a 2x in crypto? That's just nothing, right? But the other really interesting thing, I'd love to go to Sammy for his perspective on this, maybe circle back to Legendary too, is the idea that, I think it was the Bitwise guy who's communicating this, it might have been someone else, but the idea that at one point in time when they were communicating with clients, they had to speak about the Bitcoin ETF as with gold as the comparison, like maybe we can get there, maybe we can flip it. They were suggesting now that actually the way the narrative is changing is like, well, maybe this is worth many, many multiples of gold for various reasons of why this digital asset has qualities to it which make it much more useful and relevant in the modern world than gold is. And what they were suggesting, and I don't know if this is 100% true, but that the narrative can potentially move from, and I appreciate we're not even there yet, we haven't even flipped it yet, but this is what they were saying, so that's what I'm explaining, that the message is changing from we can be gold to, hang on, no, we're going to be many, many multiples of gold for the various reasons of why Bitcoin's so significant. Sam, you want to hear your thoughts on that first? Legendary will circle back to you maybe after we get some thoughts from Funky too.
Yeah, I mean, I always look at the underlying asset. You've got gold, which strikes me as like analog, and then you've got Bitcoin, which strikes me as more digital, a digital equivalent. I think there's a number of things that, like, around supply and demand, that are just different, that you just know what Bitcoin is. So you don't really know that with gold. Like, the amount of gold that's underground, you can probably guess, but also what happens when asteroid mining becomes a thing and you have an inflow of gold that completely destroys the supply, and that doesn't necessarily hold water then. So I think, I don't know, I think it's just a different underlying asset. I think the fact that it's digitally scarce, it gives that security, provided there's no black swan event that completely undermines the Bitcoin network, then it strikes me as like something that is kind of the future. And I think inevitably you've already got big institutions looking to tokenize stuff on chain. It just feels like this is the way everything's going. So yeah, it just makes sense that it's going to be that many multiples higher. And I think there was a chart that I looked at, I can't remember, maybe about a month ago, that compared that the rate of inflows for the gold ETF versus the rate of inflows of the Bitcoin ETF, and it was just parabolic for the Bitcoin ETF, just in terms of a time frame. And I know in the current modern era, it's more of an information age, so things happen quicker. You've got virality with the internet, so things get adopted quicker and dumped quicker. But to me, that just struck me as like a pretty clear indicator that if this trend continues, then gold is going to be surpassed pretty quickly.
Yeah, really interesting stuff. Funky, would love to hear your thoughts. Resident Bitcoin expert, welcome to the stage, my friend. What are you thinking here?
GM, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm out running, but Sammy kind of touched on this. When you look at the gold ETF, it took 10 years to get roughly to the current point where it is now, and you just look at Bitcoin, we're already halfway there in a couple months. It's absolutely insane. I don't know if somebody dropped in the Modern Market Discord, but I read this morning that now the Bitcoin miners, HUD-8 specifically, are getting calls directly from big banks wanting to buy the Bitcoin straight from the miners. No one's bullish enough.
No one's bullish enough on you, Funky, tuning in and contributing while running. That's pretty insane. Pretty insane statistics as well. Thanks for that contribution. Legendary, tie us up here. We're at time for the end of the show. Final reflections, whether it's on the Bitcoin ETF or anything else happening in the market at the moment. Final conclusion.
Will be a couple of wonderful years ahead. Also very curious to see ETH ETF playing out. I think Bakuna's now corrected his chances to 70% of it actually going through. Almost
Really?
button that I had placed
I haven't seen that.
on Polymarket. I don't know if I placed 1K or 1 ETH on it, but I know that I placed a bet that we will have the ETF, and I should check in on that because I know I can cash out before that if the odds have changed.
Interesting. Okay, we need to do a bit of research and come back to that. Come back to that pretty soon. But that's very, very interesting to hear that updated. But guys, that is the end of our show today. We hope you enjoyed it. As always, we do this every single day, Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern Time, 12 p.m. GMT. Everything to do with NFTs, crypto, generally just trying to make some money on the internet and in crypto specifically. So we hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you to my co-hosts, Legendary and Sammy, as always. Thank you to our running speaker, Funky, and all of our contributors. And thank you guys for joining in again. Take care. We will see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.